Welcome back to Indus Bulletin. At least 24 Rohingya Muslims have starved to death on a ship stranded in the Bay of Bengal for weeks. Over 750,000 Muslim minority members fled to Bangladesh after the 2017 massacre by Myanmar's army. Bangladesh Coast Guard officials say they rescued over 390 others from the illegal vessel trying to reach Malaysia. The officials said the refugees were at sea for about 2 months. It is unclear whether the refugees had left from Bangladesh or Myanmar. Some reports said the boat had been turned back by Malaysia because of the coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, Malaysian police said several boats were trying to reach the country's shores and monitoring had been stepped up. In the U.S., nearly 2,500 people have died in the past 24 hours, setting a new record for daily deaths in the country. With over 31,000 dead in the U.S., the global death toll has now crossed 136,000, with over 2 million infections. More details in this report.
The pandemic that has brought the entire world to its knees is devastating the U.S., killing an increasing number of people each day. But President Donald Trump insists the worst is over and says some states will reopen this month. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says it regrets Trump's decision to pull funding for the agency and call for world unity against coronavirus.
We regret the decision of the President of the United States to order a hold in funding to the World Health Organization. With support from the people and government of the United States, WHO works to improve the health of many of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people.
Elsewhere, German Chancellor Angela Merkel plans to slowly ease restrictions while keeping social distancing rules in place till 3rd May. Germany has recorded the highest daily death toll of 315, increasing the total count to over 3,500 with 130,450 infection cases so far. The UK, on the other hand, says it is too soon to begin thinking about the next steps as the pandemic in the country is reaching the peak.
Our view is that it's probably reaching the peak overall, and that's what the flattening shows. I think it's important, and I'm saying this because new data will come out presumably tomorrow. My expectation would be that the number of deaths may well go up because there has been after every weekend.
Over in South Korea, life has begun to return to normalcy as recoveries outweigh new infections. The country once had the second largest outbreak in the world.
In Pakistan, 17 people have died from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to 124. The health ministry said over 1,600 people have recovered from the deadly virus across the country. The ministry said 520 new infections were reported since yesterday, bringing the total number of cases to 6,505. It said 58% of infections are local, while the remaining 42% have a history of foreign travel. Meanwhile, 41 Pakistanis stranded in India are due to arrive in the country through Wagah border. After the COVID-19 lockdown in both countries, 188 Pakistanis are stuck in India, while 205 Indian citizens are stranded in Pakistan. U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has expressed concern over religious segregation in India during the COVID-19 pandemic. Earlier, Indian media reported in Gujarat, Muslims and Hindu patients are being kept in separate wards under the government's orders. In a tweet, the body said such actions will further increase stigmatization of Muslims in India and fan more hatred against them. Meanwhile, thousands of migrant workers are still stranded in different states, including Kerala and Bihar. Talking to media, the workers said they just want to go home because it has become a matter of life and death for them. India has so far reported 422 deaths from COVID-19 and over 12,000 infection cases across the country. In another news, China has rejected U.S. allegations that it conducted secret low-level underground nuclear test explosions. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Beijing is committed to a moratorium on nuclear tests. Zhao said China has been actively fulfilling commitments to treaties on arms control and said false U.S. accusations are not worth refuting. Earlier, the State Department said China may have secretly set off a low-level underground nuclear test despite an international pact. Meanwhile, the US also accused Russia of carrying out a test of an anti-satellite missile, saying such activity threatens American assets in space. The US says 11 vessels of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy came dangerously close to its Navy ships in the Persian Gulf. The hostility between the two countries is at its peak since the US unilaterally pulled out of 2015 nuclear deal. The US Navy said Iranian vessels approached 6 US military ships during integration operations in international waters. It said at one point the vessels came within 10 yards of the US Coast Guard cutter Maui. The Navy said US ships issued several warnings through bridge-to-bridge radio and blasts from the ship's horns. Iranian authorities have not commented on the incident as of yet. Ankara says a Turkish soldier has been killed in a terrorist attack by the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Iraq. The defense ministry says the soldier was killed in a landmine explosion in the Hakkari region. The Turkish forces are in Iraq for Operation Claw against the PKK, launched in May last year. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year-long terror campaign. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his rival Benny Gans have failed to meet the deadline to form a unity government. President Rivlin had given a 2-day extension in the negotiation period to Gans, which ended last night. Israel state media said disagreements over a power-sharing formula between the two parties are being blamed for the deadlock. According to the constitution, the parliament now has to nominate a candidate to become prime minister in 21 days. He would then have 14 days to form a government. Failure to do so will automatically dissolve parliament and trigger a snap election. More on the elections. In South Korea, the party of President Moon Jae-in has won a decisive victory in parliamentary elections held yesterday. With nearly all votes counted, Moon's Democratic Party won 163 of 300 seats in the National Assembly. Ruling party's sister group, the Platform Party, has won 17 seats, giving the government a total of 180 seats. National Election Commission says the conservative opposition United Future Party and its smaller sister party have won 103 seats. Meanwhile, Tae Yong-ho has become the first ever North Korean defector to win a constituency seat in South Korea. National Election Commission says due to COVID-19, strict safety and social distancing measures were in place for the vote. The UK and the European Union have agreed to hold 3 more rounds of talks to negotiate the post-Brexit trade deal. UK's chief negotiator David Frost and European Commission's chief negotiator Michel Barnier discussed the progress in a video conference. The rounds of talks will be held on 20th April, 11th of May and 1st of June. The joint statement said all major areas of divergence and convergence have been identified. It also said the goal is to make real and tangible progress in the negotiations by June. Meanwhile, the IMF has urged the UK and the EU to extend trade talks period amid coronavirus. A third of nearly 2,000 sailors aboard a French aircraft carrier have tested positive for COVID-19. Paris says 668 sailors from Charles de Gaulle and escort vessels and its battle group are confirmed to have the virus. The Defense Ministry said 31 crew members were being treated in the hospital, with one in intensive care. Last week, France decided to bring Charles de Gaulle home 10 days early from a deployment in the Atlantic after crew members showed virus symptoms. The carrier, which had helicopters and fighter jets on board, was accompanied by 2 frigates. Sailors from Charles de Gaulle, one of the frigates, and pilots who returned aircraft to their respective bases are all placed in isolation for 14 days. Ukraine says its government forces and pro-Russian separatists in the Donbas region have started this year's first prisoner swap. In a statement, the president's office said Ukraine will take back 19 of its citizens from a checkpoint on the contact line. The statement said President Volodymyr Zelensky is complying with the agreements reached during the Normandy summit in December 2019. Zelensky's office said negotiations were also ongoing for the release of Ukrainians held in Russia. The Donbas conflict has killed more than 13,000 people since 2014. Russia says it is looking into a global ceasefire proposal put forward by the UN chief over the coronavirus crisis. Speaking in Moscow, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said work with regards to implementing a ceasefire is underway. He said Moscow will give a statement on the matter once the work is completed. Last month, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for a global ceasefire so the world can focus on fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron said the leaders of Russia, China, and the US have assured him of their support for the UN's plea. The UN has warned health systems in war-torn countries have collapsed, leaving them unable to deal with the coronavirus. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Greece has transferred a dozen unaccompanied children from overcrowded migrant camps to Luxembourg. The minors belong to camps on the islands of Lesbos, Chios, and Samos. Another group of 50 children is likely to fly from Athens to Germany on Saturday, while 20 more will head to Switzerland later. Athens hopes to relocate some 1,600 unaccompanied minors amid concerns over the impact of coronavirus on vulnerable groups. Over 5,000 migrant children from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and African countries currently languish in Greece. Turkey has released the first batch of prisoners after ratifying a penal reform law to stem the spread of COVID-19 in jails. State media says the parliament passed the law on Tuesday by a 274-51 vote. It said authorities released some 650 prisoners after necessary procedures by gendarmerie forces. The law excludes prisoners convicted for sex and drug crimes, first-degree murder, violence against women, and terror acts. It enables house arrest for some inmates over 65, women who have children aged 6 and under, and sick prisoners. On Monday, Justice Minister confirmed 17 cases of coronavirus in 5 open prisons, while 3 inmates have died from the virus. Turkey has confirmed over 1,500 deaths from COVID-19 so far. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she will take a 20% pay cut for the next 6 months amid the economic impact of coronavirus. She says ministers in her government and public service chief executives will also take the same pay cuts. Economic activity in New Zealand is at a standstill as the country undertakes one of the strictest lockdowns globally. The government has forecast joblessness to surge because of the global and domestic slowdown. So far, New Zealand has recorded over 1,400 cases of COVID-19 with 9 deaths.
Government ministers and public service chief executives will take a 20% pay cut for the next 6 months, as we acknowledge New Zealanders who are reliant on wage subsidies, taking pay cuts and losing their jobs as a result of COVID-19's global pandemic.
8 people have died in rain-related incidents in Pakistan's northern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Police said 4 members of a family died when the roof of their house collapsed in Matani area of Peshawar. In other incidents, a family of 3 and a woman died after the roofs of their house caved in Lower Deer and Mahmud Agency. Meanwhile, the local administrations have issued a warning of river overflow after 2 days of rain. The UN has backed Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan's call for a global initiative for debt relief to the developing countries. Meanwhile, Pakistan has been included in the group of countries eligible for debt relief announced by the G20 countries. UN Chief Spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said Khan's initiative echoes the Secretary General's own position. He said Antonio Guterres believes debt relief must be an important part of the coronavirus response. Earlier, Pakistan sought China's support for Prime Minister Imran Khan's global initiative. In a telephonic conversation with his Chinese counterpart, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said COVID-19 has a devastating impact on the world economy. He said the developing countries are facing the brunt of it. Iran has thanked China for its support against the COVID-19 pandemic. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif called his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi to express gratitude. Zarif said Beijing sent anti-epidemic goods and medical experts to Iran. He said China has condemned US sanctions on Tehran, which has hindered the country's fight against the deadly virus. The foreign minister said they also discussed bilateral partnership and the peace process in Afghanistan. Earlier, Zarif condemned the US for halting funding to the WHO, saying the world is learning what Iran has experienced all along. The US has asked China for transparency and information sharing to fight against coronavirus pandemic. State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo held a telephone conversation with Beijing's top diplomat. She said Pompeo talked about the importance of US-China relations. He said China's facilitation of medical supply exports to the US is crucial. For his part, Yang Jiechi told Pompeo he hoped Washington would meet Beijing halfway and focus on cooperation. The two countries have been at loggerheads over the pandemic. US Senator Elizabeth Warren says she endorses Joe Biden for president. This gives the presumptive Democratic frontrunner another high-profile backing from one of his former rivals. Warren, a progressive leader who ended her own bid for the White House last month, released a video announcing her support. Earlier this week, Senator Bernie Sanders and former President Barack Obama also endorsed Biden. Warren said, "In this moment of crisis, it's important that the next president restores Americans' faith in the effective government." However, she said she does not agree with Biden all the time, but praises his willingness to adapt. Biden has adopted Warren's plan on bankruptcy, on which the two rivals had clashed over in the past. NATO defense ministers say they will work on to counter the spread of disinformation amid the coronavirus pandemic. In a statement, the US Department of Defense said NATO will maintain a strong deterrence and defense posture to preserve alliance security. The statement emphasized on the importance of countering misinformation from both state and non-state actors. The department said many people are using the pandemic to spread false and harmful narratives. As the coronavirus crisis exacerbates, the International Vaccine Institute says it is hopeful for progress in development of an anti-coronavirus vaccine. In an interview, Director General Jerome Kim said it is a remarkable achievement to have human trials around the globe in 2 months. More in this report.
Kim said vaccines, in general, are hard to develop, but the global focus on one target can achieve positive results. He said global cooperation is required to vaccinate a major section of the world population.
It takes between 5 and 10 years to develop a vaccine, but these are not usual circumstances. So scientists around the world are hoping that we are able to prove that a vaccine works in 12 to 18 months.
Meanwhile, the University Hospital of Wales in Cardiff hopes to offer the treatment as part of a study within a month.
Now, birthday celebrations have been cancelled across the globe due to the measures to stop the spread of the coronavirus. But a family in the US has found other ways to make their child's landmark day special despite the lockdown. Let's find out more about this celebration here in this report.
Reuben Goodman parents had to get creative when the COVID-19 pandemic scuppered their plans for a bowling party to celebrate their son's 5th birthday. They instead decided to combine a variety of coronavirus-safe activities for their son, an avid Star Wars fan. The day includes a social distancing treasure hunt of sorts. It featured dancing in the streets in his stormtrooper costume, with friends kept at a contagion-proof distance. There was also a virtual Zoom party featuring treats delivered to the homes of Reuben's playmates and left outside their front doors.
The International Monetary Fund says economic growth in Asia will ground to a halt in 2020 for the first time in 60 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This comes after the IMF warned the global economy will face worst recession since the Great Depression in 1930s. In a blog, the monetary body said the drop in growth will be far worse than the global financial crisis. In its report, Fiscal Monitor 2020, IMF said economic fallout of COVID-19 will cause a major increase in fiscal deficits and public debt ratios. The managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, said the fund is looking to triple its concessional financing to help the poorest countries.
What we have seen is central banks providing ample liquidity, $8 trillion of fiscal measures. So our message is spend as much as you can, but keep the receipts.
European stock markets are trading higher as countries begin easing lockdown measures to revive stalled economies. Investor sentiments have picked up ahead of a Eurozone industrial production data for February due to be released later in the day. Frankfurt's DAX has gained over 1%. CAC 40 in Paris is trading over 1%. London's FTSE 100 has surged marginally. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the losses, closing over 1% lower after index heavyweight Fanuc shares declined over 2.5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost over 0.5%, while Shanghai Composite gained ground. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained about 2% after plummeting due to a demand slump. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.